So on today's video, I thought we'd reflect on those first 5 years of Boss Tuneage, the first era of Boss Tuneage, and things that I've sort of taken from those days that are still relevant to the label now. Stay tuned, I'll tell you more. So, as I've come to the end of the band spotlights for the first era of Boss Tuneage and the bands that we were involved with back then, as well as talking to you about sort of like my memories from the very, very early days of setting up the label, I thought it was probably a good time to just have like a little recap of those first 5 years, not only to go through everything that was planned and didn't happen, but also to kind of look at what things that have become really clear to me looking back on these days now that I was to take forward in order for when the label would eventually restart in 1999, and you know, things that actually have come to light from doing these videos, which makes me think, why on earth was I doing that? So let's have a look at those in a bit more detail. So I think the first thing that becomes really clear was my age, inexperience and naivety. Remember, I was 17 and a half when I started, and by the time the label kind of fizzled out in 94, 95, I was 22 and just in my first job. So I think that, you know, the thing that shone through was just my naivety on so many aspects, not only of running a record label, but in effect running what was, to all intents and purposes, a business. So obviously in those first 5 years, I didn't kind of have a job. I was either living at home with my parents or I became a student, so I wasn't reliant on the record label for any kind of source of income. And I think because of that, looking back now, I was just completely naive on what kind of revenues and finance that it was going to cost to run a record label. You know, there were lots of decisions here. You know, we were making pennies on some of these records, which weren't enough to cover like the actual costs of my time doing it, and obviously that wasn't the important thing to me at the time. But if I'd have actually gone on the enterprise allowance scheme, which was my plan when I graduated, to try to do the label properly, I think I'd have fallen flat on my ass, to be quite honest, because I just didn't have any kind of budgeting going on or any real strategy. Something that is also become very obvious to me going through all these releases and all these bands was my reliance on shop distribution, and how I kind of thought that, you know, the distributors to the shops were going to be the way that I was going to expand the label. Now, when I started back in 1999, my reliance on shop distribution was minimal. I mean, I've always wanted to get our records into shops, but by 1999, when I started again, by no means was it the main part of how I planned to sell records. And it's quite funny looking back that sort of some of the things I was releasing, I think honestly I was doing it to try to build up shop distribution and look at getting an M&D deal, which never happened. And I think some of the choices that I made from that is kind of interesting. And looking back now in hindsight, if I could go back in a time machine to 17, 18-year-old me, I would be saying look for like-minded labels around the world doing similar stuff to what you're doing and see how you can all work together. Because really, looking back in hindsight, to have made it work with a shop distributor at that time, I would have had to have basically had a PR agent, be doing a lot more promos, a lot more advertising, which I just didn't have the budget for, and it would be much better working on a much bigger DIY network of punk labels around the world working together. Now, an obvious thing that, you know, is a caveat to this, and what must be remembered, is in the early 90s there was no focal point for the UK underground punk scene. Obviously the US had Maximum Rock and Roll, Germany had things like Ox and Trust magazines, which were really important to their scene, but the UK didn't have that. There was an attempt, I know Steve Cotton was involved in it, for UK Resist, which became sort of like was going to be a regular occurring fanzine, which would be a source of information, gigs, releases, etc, etc. But UK Resist fizzled out, and there wasn't going to be that focal point for the UK scene until Fracture fanzine came along in the very late 90s, which obviously sort of coincided with when I restarted again. So that was a really important thing. It was hard to actually get a focal point for everyone to know what was going on. So a lot of it was word of mouth and a lot of it got missed. Another thing to remember is that in sort of 1991-92 time, the UK went into a recession. So, money was tight for people. So I think that had a knock-on effect with bands, because if they were sort of having to fund their own gigs and recordings, which was happening a lot, it became harder and harder. And the juxtaposition of this, and the quite ironic thing is, it was just as alternative music was getting bigger and bigger. So there was very much a look towards everything American happening at the time, and a lot of UK bands did struggle in that climate. Of course, there were some obvious exceptions in the UK. Obviously, people like Census Things and Mega City 4 would obviously go on to further success, and also Leatherface, of course. But those were done on either larger independent labels or on actual major labels. But if you were to look at like the bands that were like on the Floor 81 compilation LP, it was a very hard time for those bands, and a lot of them just gave up. But I think with the whole UK bands, I think it all kind of shifted a bit when Snuff, the original Snuff, decided to call it a day. I was lucky enough to see their last show on the 15th of August 1991 down in London, the same day I got my A-level results. But yeah, the whole thing kind of shifted a bit from that point. And of course, within 6 weeks of that last ever Snuff show, then Nirvana were releasing Nevermind and Smells Like Teen Spirit, and it all went off in a bit of a different direction. And obviously then Nirvana in late 91 just exploded, and then, on the back tail of that, bands like Green Day, and loads of bands getting onto sort of major labels. But if I look back at it now, I was actually more interested in the stuff that Lookout and SST Cruise were doing rather than the UK labels. And the UK labels really started to struggle at that time. Meantime stopped, so that was SMR. Vinyl Solution kind of also fizzled out, and Full Circle, I think Andy stopped doing Full Circle around that time as well, so there wasn't really the labels there. Carl from Words of Warning carried on, and there was one or two labels that would come on a bit later, like Subjugation, Armed With Anger, and people like that, but they weren't there in those early 90s. And so it's a kind of a weird thing that at a point when this music was kind of just there, ready to get a lot more popular, it just wasn't happening. And so it's quite an eye-opener thinking back now how there was so much looking towards the States going on, and not looking at the UK scene. Another key thing that I would do if I could get back in the time machine to 17-year-old me now would be keep at least 2 records of Who's Got Your Stock. If you've seen the Goo Patrol video, you'll know that I basically used to send out lots of stuff to smaller DIY distros on sale or return. And there was a lot of sale or return distros that never paid me because I lost the record when my parents' van, where the invoice book was in, was stolen and burnt out. So I lost complete track of so much stuff, and that's why when I was really keen that when I restarted the label again, we didn't do any kind of sale or return to DIY distributors. It basically became wholesale was cash up front. Which is an ethos I've kept to this day. So any time with the label where I've gone away from that sale or return mantra, it's more often than not caused problems, and it's made me realise why I had that mantra in the first place. There are a few caveats to that. There were 1 or 2 people who I knew and trusted who'd paid me from back in the day, who I continued to do sale or return with. But the days of me sending out stock and waiting for money to come back out, having had my fingers burned so badly with that was gone. And I was very keen moving forward from 1999, apart from like main people who we were working with, that no sale or return. If someone was interested in distributing our stuff, we'd either have to trade or they'd have to buy the records wholesale up front. And that's always been the bottom line from me ever since 1999. Another thing I'd do if I could get back in this time machine would go to 17-year-old me, would be to say, do not overpromise and underdeliver. I think I was so keen, looking back in hindsight, there were bands that I'd said, I'll put your stuff out, that I shouldn't have done that at the time. And it's become, ever since I restarted the label in 1999, unless I knew how I was going to pay for that record, then I won't approach a band to do their record. I think it was unfortunately there were bands like Shutdown and Ran got caught up in that crossfire of a perfect storm. I think that I was naive, thinking that the next release will sell through the same and I can do this, and it just wasn't realistic in a way. You know, I always had belief that I could put out those records, but I didn't actually have a strategy together to ensure that I put out those records. And in all honesty, it probably left me in a bit of a mess come like 94, 95. So when I started up again in 1999, one of the first things I did was contact all the bands who'd kind of been caught up in that crossfire as much as I could, to put things right, basically. But it's not all negatives. I mean, I think on one of the pluses that, you know, looking back now, is that we were one of the first labels, I believe, in the UK to look at doing co-releases in the way that we did. And sometimes the co-releases would work out and other times they didn't, for various reasons. But if you think about it now, in the UK DIY punk scene, you know, co-releases are commonplace. But back then, it was very much that people who were putting records out just did their own records, and then would try to sell them. There was very little in the way of sort of cooperation between people, which is silly for a small island, you know, and a small scene. There should have been a lot more cooperation. But it just wasn't sort of like the done thing then. But I think that's, over the years, that has evolved, and that's a really good thing. But yeah, I suppose in hindsight, if I was to sort of summarise those first 5 years, it was definitely a case of learning on the job, learning by your mistakes, realising your mistakes, and making sure those mistakes don't happen again. And obviously this seemed like a perfect time to do a video like this, because I've kind of finished looking at that era now. But obviously, if there was any people who have got questions or things they want to ask me about anything related with Boss Tuneage, then let me know, and you know, I can obviously do a video about those, or even a Q&A or whatever, you know, people would like. You know, if there's anything that you feel I've missed out that you'd want to know about. So in true Alan Freeman fluff pick of the pop style, let's run down the releases on Boss Tuneage in those early years from 1990 to 95. Hostage 001 was the Goo Patrol Vehicle Derrick split 7-inch EP. Hostage 002 Damage TV Bible Mini LP. Hostage 003 Wanton Thought Must Admit 7-inch EP. Hostage 004 Goober Patrol Truck Off LP. Hostage 005, Various Artists, the Floor 81 compilation LP. Hostage 006, Wordbug, Losing It All LP. Hostage 007, Shutdown, same title, 12-inch. Hostage 008, Sofahead, Exit Condition, 98 minutes in the Plastic Bucket, split LP, not released. Hostage 009, Goober Patrol, Dutch Ovens, LP and CD. Hostage 010, Five for Nothing, Pretty Nuclear, LP, not released. Hostage 011, Rise, same title, LP and CD. Hostage 012, Rise, Where to Find 7-inch. Hostage 013, Loose, Rock Salat, 7-inch. Hostage 014, Life But How to Live It, Ugly, CD. Hostage 015, Life But How to Live It, Burn Green, Mini CD. Hostage 016, It's the Sexuals, Love Goes Plaid, 7-inch. Hostage 017, it's the follow-up comp LP to Floor 81. Oh no, it's not. It's the Ram Little Tasmania 7-inch. Oh no, it's not. It's actually Hooten 3 Car Spot Daylight 12-inch EP. Hostage 018, it's the Ram Little Tasmania 7-inch. Oh no, it's not. It's Shutdown, a mix of Real Bronx Cheer LP. Oh no, it's not. It's Miranda Warning 12-speed pop blender. Hostage 019, it's the Rise Jack CD. It should have been an LP, and I never got the copies of it. Hostage 020 is the Wordbug Bytail Zero split 7-inch EP. Hostage 021, Wordbug Locked In 7-inch. Hostage 022, Ram Beautiful Songs for Ugly Children LP, then CD. Neither were released. Hostage 023, Wordbug Die 7-inch. Tuneage 024, Shut Down, Amidst a Real Bronx Cheer, LP. No it's not, it's a CD. No it's not been released. And Boss Tuneage 024, Annalise, Fettered CD EP, which I'd only give that catalogue number to in 1999 when I restarted the label because it was actually Out of Order Records 0001. That's it, not half. But on top of all those, there were actually other releases that were talked about and penciled in at various stages along those 5 years, so I'll go through a few of those as well. There was a definite plan to do a Wordbug 7-inch after losing it all with the original recording of I Don't Doubt It on it, and the other two songs they did then. Rise, we planned to do a Don't Feel the Same 7-inch, which then got shelved. We also planned to do a Rise Trigger Happy, the Canadian band, split 7-inch single as well. Love Junk, talked about doing a 7-inch single by them. HDQ, we'd seriously spoken to HDQ about doing their follow-up to Soulfinder before the band obviously split up soon after that. Likewise with Sleep. We did have conversations about doing a mini album by them after Cat and Mouse before they split up. Also spoke to Couch Potatoes about doing a 7-inch EP called Brad, which featured 4 songs from the Access All Areas album that they'd recorded. And we also spoke to Mad at the Sun about doing a retrospective album of theirs, which obviously we ended up doing a CD reissue of in the later era of Boss Tuneage. So there was lots planned, but that's it for this video. I'll see you on the next one.